Welcome, everyone. In a world filled with hustle and bustle, it's the small acts of kindness that leave an everlasting impact on our lives. Today, we're diving into heartfelt stories from people on Reddit about the little gestures that made a big difference. Get ready to be inspired, and if you believe in the power of kindness, hit that subscribe button to join our community of compassion. Let's spread positivity together. What small act of kindness were you once shown that you will never forget? We were a poor family. My mom had made a point of saving up enough once to take my sister and I to the zoo and AMP museum. We had a great day, even ate out. Then, on the way to the bus stop heading home, she realized she'd overspent and AMP didn't have enough to pay for all three of us to get there. We were looking at a 6-mile walk, and it had just started snowing. We duck into a small Chinese restaurant and AMP. Ask if we can use the phone. Mom was going to ask someone for a ride. The owner asks us why we needed the phone, and after Mom explains, he not only gave us the money we needed to get on the bus, but also sent us home with enough food to feed 6 people. My mom told him we'd try to pay him back one day, but he asked we pay it forward instead. It was the first random act of kindness that I'd ever received in AMP. Sticks with me 30 years later. I was in maybe 4th grade, and my parents just had my younger sister, so newborn focused. I went to my school lunch, opened my paper bag, are those still a thing? And unwrapped the foil holding my sandwich. There was nothing inside. It was actually just 2 slices of dry white slice bread, and I was sad. Literally, my table mates all chipped in various components and made me the most amazing ham and cheese sandwich I've ever had. I've been chasing that dragon of ham sandwich since, but I'm sure it was the response and not the ingredients that I loved. One miserable, wet, slushy morning, my baby was sick and we needed groceries, milk, and her prescription. I got the groceries and meds, and as I shoved my cart through the sloppy parking lot, my jug of milk toppled onto the ground and exploded. A woman saw me and picked the jug up for me and said, "You can go back in and they will get you a new one." And I replied, "Thank you, but my baby is sick and I just need to get her home," and started buckling her into her car seat and unloading the rest of my groceries. Right as I was finishing up, the same lady came rushing out of the store and handed me a new jug of milk. I was so thankful I was literally crying in the parking lot. It's almost 12 years ago now, and I still think about that lady and her kindness. I hope she's having a wonderful life. My oldest child was in the hospital on a ventilator, sick with pneumonia after a bone marrow transplant for an aggressive leukemia. He was 13 years old at the time. I was a single mother struggling to survive. I had 2 other sons, younger than the one who was sick, one of whom had a brain tumor removed the year before. I could not work full-time because of how much time was spent at the hospital. My job was giving me as many hours as it could, but it was not enough to pay my bills. I managed rent, gas, and cheap groceries, but things like car insurance, renewing my driver's license, and registration and other things had begun to slip. I was hanging on by my fingernails and going under. One night on the way back to the hospital after working really late, my job was letting me flex my hours, I got pulled over for having an expired registration. The officer then discovered I had an expired driver's license and had no car insurance. Obviously, I had no business being on the road, and he told me he was supposed to tow the car. I was exhausted to my core. I became absolutely horrified when tears started to fall. I didn't want him to feel manipulated. I'm a pretty proud person. I knew I shouldn't be out there. I also felt I had no choice, that I absolutely needed my car and that I could not afford to pay any citations I received. The hospital capable of caring for my son was about 40 minutes from our small apartment, and my city doesn't have good public transportation. I had to be able to drive, so I just said nothing and struggled to stop any tears. I just nodded. I figured it was just another challenge I was going to have to figure out, and I had no idea how. He paused for what felt like forever at the time, and when he realized I wasn't going to say anything, asked me where I was going. I quietly told him. Headed back to the hospital. My son has cancer and is in the pediatric ICU. The officer had no reason to believe me. He thought for a moment more, then quietly handed my expired license back to me. He followed me to the hospital, then turned off and went about his shift. My son died a few weeks later, in January 2007, just after Christmas. To this day, I wish so much I knew that officer's name. I still would like to thank him. I was barely hanging on, and that little bit of kindness mattered more than I can express. I was so poor, so heartbroken, and so hopeless. I will never forget him. I had a personal issue that kept me from attending class for 2 weeks in a row. At the time, I was taking an experimental moot court class at an undergrad level. Usually this class is only taught in law school, but my professor wanted to pioneer a moot court team. Finally, I show up and he stops me at the door asking me where the hell I have been. I plead my case and tell him, "Truth be told, things aren't going well. I'm sorry I let it get to this." He gave me his personal phone number and told me to call him at any time. I got caught up on a case and sent an email to him that I needed help. It was 8:30 p.m. He replied, "Call me." He picked up and spent almost 2 hours working through case law theory and the special exception to the Fourth Amendment search and seizure doctrine. I got second in our moot court competition and secured a coveted letter of recommendation from one of the law professors at my college at the time. His small act of kindness set the stage for me living a life with intent and clear communication with those I surround myself with. I learned to trust others from that moment. He could have failed me, I would have lost my scholarship, and I would have had to drop out. He didn't. He showed me kindness. I got my GPA back up next semester. Best professor I ever had. Back when I was a kid of about 14 or so, I was racing to get home for my curfew. As I rode my push bike as fast as I could, my front wheel hit some gravel and slid out from under me. I crashed heavily. Bloodied and concussed, I just stared at my bike. A couple walking past went to a phone box, remember those? And called a taxi. They bundled me and my broken bike into the taxi, asked the driver how much to get me home, and paid him. I don't know who these people were or what compelled them to help me. But over 40 years on, I am still grateful to 2 complete strangers for getting me home that day. My parents were still upset, not because I was late home, but because they decided I needed to go to hospital to get stitched back up. I was 17 and it was my first time driving myself to a rock concert. I was dumb, had no idea where I was, and it was before cell phones and all that. I ended up running out of gas, and I was a total stereotype. Scared, skinny white kid in a real bad part of town. This dude came out of his house yelling at someone still in the house and froze when he saw me. He goes, "What the fuck are you doing here?" And I said I ran out of gas. He just walked away back into the house. Dude comes out with an empty laundry detergent bottle and goes, "Come on, I'll take you up there. Don't know if they'll let us put gas in this, but we'll figure it out." They in fact did not let us put gas in it, or LOL. But they did sell a 2-gallon can, which I then filled up and we walked back to the car together. I love people, and I've met a lot of them, but I think he is by far one of the most awesome people I'll ever meet. Never even got his name. It was the simplest but nicest thing. I was a college professor. We had finished class, but a couple of students, I think all students I'd taught before in other classes, had hung around to chat a little as I got my things together. I can't remember how conversation led to it, but I explained that we had lost our beloved dog that weekend after a battle with cancer. It was terrible and much too soon. She was only 6 years old. And she was the most wonderful, special, loving dog. One of my students just had the kindest, warmest, most gentle tone as he expressed his condolences and mentioned his own dog that he'd lost. It's difficult to put into words, irony, I was an English professor, but there was a kind, sincere gentleness and compassion in his tone and bearing that deeply touched me. I doubt he remembers it at all, but I think of it when I see his posts on Facebook almost 20 years later. I still think of him as a fundamentally good and compassionate person, and everything I've seen from him since supports that. I was being really badly bullied at school. It had got to the point that I couldn't even come into school in the morning without being attacked. One day at assembly, before the teachers came in, 3 other boys decided it would be hysterically funny to start punching me in the back and face. I was crying in agony and about to get the shit kicked out of me when a new boy, Lan, intervened and told them to leave me alone. It shocked pretty much everyone around me. Hell, it even shocked me. He got me out. We went out one door as the teachers were coming in another and calmed me down. He was the only friend that I had at that school. I still talk to him, and we're both now in our 50s. I had a really rough few years after high school. Kicked out at 17, no family to lean on, in the middle of a small town with nowhere to go. Went to a local pawn shop one day with my most valuable possessions. They weren't worth jack, but I just wanted money for food. The shop was pretty dead, so the owner just started talking with me for a little bit. He asked why I was selling all this stuff. I didn't give him a lot of details, but somehow he knew what I was going through. He told me to sit tight while he went to go add some stuff up. He came back with 2 big bags of food and a few bucks cash, told me that he had a rough start in life and he gets it. No judgment, no patronizing. Said he wasn't going to buy any of my stuff because I deserved to keep those pieces of myself. He was genuinely kind, and I felt seen for the first time in a long time. It's been almost 15 years since then, and I can't remember his name, although I wish I could, but I will never forget his kindness. Ever. This post is a few hours old, so not many people will probably see this, but I want to share it as a thank you to a true, genuine human being. Thank you, and I will always remember.